There was a time, a dark and electric time, when two brothers held the keys to one of the most sophisticated and powerful drug trafficking networks Europe had ever seen. From the rough working-class barrios of Madrid to the gleaming sun-drenched skyscrapers of Miami, they meticulously wove an empire from a single potent thread: cocaine. It was a world built on black money, casual violence, and intoxicating power. This is not just a story of crime. It is a raw, unflinching look at street-level brutality, a meteoric rise through the ranks of the underworld. Today, we pull back the curtain on the lives of Álvaro and Artemio López Tardón. One, the financial mastermind, the architect of money laundering on an international scale. The other, the muscle on the streets, the enforcer who kept the machine running smoothly on home soil. But their story cannot be told without mentioning their most lethal ally, a woman the press would come to fear and romanticize in equal measure, Ana María Cameno, dubbed by the tabloids as the Queen of Coke. Together, they were a trinity of terror and ambition. They were the Miamis. Say it again, let it sink in. The Miamis. This is the story of the Miamis. The origins of the Miamis are not found in boardrooms or financial districts, but in the violent, neon-lit underbelly of Madrid in the 1990s. They were born as a street gang, pure and simple. Their world was the nightlife scene, a brutal arena of discotecas, back alley deals, and debts collected through sheer, overwhelming force. Their original leader was a man named Juan Carlos Peña, a figure so feared, so resilient, that he earned the chilling nickname El Inmortal, the Immortal. Under his command, the group's primary activities were controlling nightclubs, extorting terrified businessmen for a cut of their profits, and acting as a brutal shock troop, a private army for established gypsy clans who preferred to keep their hands clean of the day-to-day bloodshed. Peña was a charismatic predator, a man whose very presence commanded a room. He was feared not only by his rivals, who knew the ferocity of his revenge, but also by his own men, who understood that his word was law and his anger was a death sentence. The nickname El Inmortal wasn't just for show. It was earned through a series of brazen assassination attempts that he somehow, miraculously, survived. Each bullet that missed him, each knife that failed to find its mark, only added to his legendary status, making him seem untouchable, a ghost made of flesh and bone. It was under this iron-fisted, violent leadership that the Miamis began to evolve. They caught the attention of a far more powerful breed of criminal: the Colombian drug cartels. The Colombians, seeing a capable and violent organization with control over key distribution points in the Spanish capital, offered them a direct line to the purest product, the golden ticket into the big leagues, direct access to massive cocaine shipments. You might be wondering, where did the name the Miamis actually come from? In a world of cryptic aliases and symbolic names, it's almost absurdly simple. There are a few versions of the story, but the most popular and widely accepted one takes us back to a trip Peña made to Miami, perhaps seeking inspiration from the city's flashy criminal glamour of the 80s, or just looking for some stylish gear. He bought several sports jackets, the kind popular at the time, with the name of the city boldly emblazoned on the back. Upon his return to Madrid, he handed them out to his closest crew members. They began wearing these jackets religiously to the nightclubs and bars they controlled. It was a uniform, a brand. Patrons and rivals alike started pointing at them, saying, "Look, it's the guys in the Miami jackets." The name stuck, and a legend was born from a simple piece of clothing. From that mundane origin, the name would come to strike fear into the hearts of many. In 1996, the National Police of Spain launched their first major offensive against the burgeoning gang. The operation was a significant blow, a warning shot across the bow. In a series of coordinated raids across Madrid, they netted 18 arrests. They seized a small arsenal of weapons, 4 kilograms of cocaine destined for the dance floors of the capital, and hundreds of ecstasy pills, the other chemical staple of the night they controlled. It was the first major strike against the group, but as history would show, it was far from the last. The violence was escalating, moving from intimidation to murder. On the cold night of November 26, 2001, Francisco Javier Manzanares, a nightclub bouncer known on the streets as Mansa, was executed with 3 close-range gunshots in the Madrid suburb of Móstoles. Mansa was only 27 years old, but he already had a long police record for violent crimes, including injuries and homicide. He was a product of his violent environment. Security forces later confirmed what everyone on the street already knew. It was a settling of scores, a hit almost certainly ordered by the Miamis. a sign that their internal and external conflicts were now entering a phase of permanent bloodshed. However, the iron grip of Peña, the Immortal, began to weaken as the new millennium dawned. The winds of change were blowing through the criminal underworld, and they carried the scent of a different kind of power. Two brothers, Álvaro and Artemio López Tardón, who had until then occupied mid-level positions within the gang, started their silent ascent. They weren't the loudest or the most visibly violent, but they possessed something far more dangerous in the long run: financial acumen and a strategic, almost corporate, vision for crime. Álvaro, in particular, was a study in ambition. He was pragmatic, calculating, and he understood that the old ways of the street brawler were a ceiling, not a foundation. He saw the future of organized crime not in the back alleys of Madrid, but in the boardrooms and real estate markets of the world. He began advocating for a shift away from the gratuitous, attention-grabbing violence of the Peña era. He wanted to professionalize the organization, to make it invisible, to make it rich beyond their wildest dreams. This put him on a direct collision course with the old guard. The definitive rupture, the bloody schism that would reshape the Spanish underworld, came in 2004. It was a year of intense, silent warfare. Álvaro was arrested briefly in Madrid on lesser charges, a move that some analysts believe was a catalyst for the power struggle. Inside the organization, tensions between Peña's loyalists and the followers of the López Tardón brothers reached a fever pitch. According to detailed police reports from the time, the situation exploded when several of Peña's most trusted men were ambushed and attacked in armed confrontations, with witnesses pointing fingers directly at men linked to the López Tardón faction. It was a declaration of war. Peña, cornered and seeing his power base crumble, did not go quietly. He organized brutal reprisals, targeting businesses and territories now controlled by his former protégés. The streets of working-class neighborhoods like Tetuán and Carabanchel became no-go zones, battlegrounds in a shadow war. In one of the most dramatic episodes of this internal strife, one of Peña's personal bodyguards, a man considered untouchable due to his proximity to the Immortal, was shot multiple times as he left a nightclub in the autumn of 2004. Though he miraculously survived, the message was unmistakable. No one was safe. The war was now open, a festering wound in the heart of the Madrid underworld. The police registered a sharp spike in violent incidents between rival gangs that year, much of it a smokescreen for this internal coup d'etat. One of the most brazen and well-documented incidents occurred in mid-2004. A group of heavily armed men stormed a nightclub in Carabanchel, a venue known to be under Peña's protection. According to the subsequent judicial summary, the attackers were carrying automatic weapons, a significant escalation in the gang's usual tactics. They didn't just shoot. They made an example of the staff. They brutally beat two bouncers, leaving one of them hospitalized with a shattered jaw, a permanent reminder of the new order. While no arrests were made at the scene, the police investigation that followed was able to trace the assault back to the López Tardón camp. In a sealed statement to the judge, a protected witness, someone who knew the stakes and the cost of speaking, gave a chilling testimony. He stated plainly, the order came directly from Álvaro. He wanted everyone to understand, from the lowest street dealer to the last of Peña's men, that Peña no longer commanded anything in Madrid. His time was over. That attack was more than a simple act of violence. It was a symbolic execution of Peña's reign, a bloody announcement that a new, more calculated era had begun. Peña, the Immortal, finally met his match not in a hail of bullets, but in the betrayal of his own ambition. He survived multiple attempts on his life, but the most important one, also in 2004, finally shattered his legend. He was shot and grievously wounded. The injuries were so severe that doctors in the hospital were forced to amputate one of his legs. The man who had dodged death so many times was now physically broken, a shadow of the fearsome leader he once was. Álvaro, seizing the advantage created by Peña's wounds and the resulting chaos and lack of cohesion within the original group, moved with surgical precision. He didn't just challenge Peña, he systematically cut all his financial and operational ties. He took control, pulling his brother Artemio up with him. The old guard was purged, sidelined, or killed. Juan Carlos Peña, stripped of his power, his money, and his structure, simply vanished from the criminal map. He was a ghost of a bygone era. That same year, 2004, saw the consolidation of the López Tardón leadership. It was the end of the gang's first chapter and the beginning of a new one, an era defined not by street fights, but by international finance, transnational logistics, and a chilling professional sophistication. With the López Tardón brothers at the helm, the Miamis underwent a radical metamorphosis. They shed the skin of the street gang and emerged as a full-fledged international criminal enterprise. The organization's structure was reinforced and expanded at a breathtaking pace, driven by a brilliant dual strategy. Álvaro, the visionary, relocated to the epicenter of his dreams, Miami. From his new base in South Beach, he would oversee the lifeblood of any cartel, the money. He became the master of money laundering, the financial puppeteer. Meanwhile, Artemio, the steadfast operator, remained in Madrid. From there, he managed the day-to-day logistics of drug trafficking, the physical flow of the product, and the gritty operational reality on the ground. Álvaro López Tardón didn't just live in Miami, he consumed it. He immersed himself in the most absolute, conspicuous luxury the city had to offer. Settled into a stunning property in the heart of South Beach, he began acquiring the toys of the super-rich. He amassed a collection of 17 high-end cars that would make a sheikh envious, including a Bugatti Veyron, a car that was more a jet fighter on wheels than an automobile, a Lamborghini Murcielago, and a stately Rolls-Royce Phantom. His mansion wasn't just decorated, it was curated, filled with original works of art valued in the millions of dollars. The money that paid for this lifestyle, the vast majority of it stemming directly from the cocaine trade, was stashed with a paranoid ingenuity. He hid it in specially constructed compartments throughout his home, some as mundane and overlooked as paint cans sitting innocently in the garage, each one stuffed with hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash. It is estimated that during his time in the United States, he successfully laundered at least $26 million, funneling dirty money through the pristine financial systems of Florida and beyond. One of his most effective laundering methods involved a complex web of shell corporations registered in notorious tax havens around the world. Numerous companies were used as conduits, channeling illicit funds into seemingly legitimate investments, high-end real estate developments, luxury car dealerships, and even respected art galleries across Florida. These transactions were always conducted through a network of trusted front men, some of whom would later find themselves in the crosshairs of an FBI investigation. While Álvaro built the financial castle in America, Artemio, operating from the Spanish capital, became the undisputed logistical brain of the entire network. His domain was the product. He controlled the relentless flow of pure cocaine arriving from the labs of Colombia and Peru. He managed a parallel network of front men in Spain and coordinated the creation of a web of fictitious companies designed to provide a legal facade for their rapidly growing fortune. His preferred method for soaking up excess cash was investing in prime real estate and luxury car dealerships, assets that held their value and could be easily sold. Under his watchful supervision, the drug routes were meticulously organized. They utilized standard shipping containers, a technique that allowed them to move massive quantities. They employed vehicles with sophisticated double bottoms, hidden compartments that could evade casual inspection. They cultivated deep, corrupt contacts within the port of Valencia, one of Spain's busiest maritime hubs. These contacts were invaluable, facilitating the smooth passage of multi-ton shipments directly from South America. During these peak years, it is calculated that the group successfully imported and distributed more than 7.5 tons of cocaine into the European market. The financial scale was staggering. In the single year of 2010 alone, the network managed to move over 52 million euros in cash, a river of bills that needed to be counted, stored, and hidden. The business achieved such a level of corporate sophistication that the Spanish police, in their internal reports, described it not as a gang, but as a criminal business structure. They noted its clearly defined departments, its rigid hierarchies, and its specialized functions, a model that mirrored a legitimate multinational corporation with a CEO in Miami, a COO in Madrid, and a supply chain stretching across 2 continents. In parallel with the brothers' rise, another figure was solidifying her power within the organization, a woman who would become as infamous as the leaders themselves, Ana María Cameno, the woman the press would later anoint as the Queen of Coke. Her ascent was anything but accidental. While she began as a collaborator in smaller, less sophisticated trafficking networks, she demonstrated an innate talent for the business. She possessed a rare combination of skills, a genius for organization, a network of high-level contacts in South America, and a deep, practical knowledge of the chemical processes required to treat and refine raw cocaine paste into the final marketable product. Cameno was no mere intermediary, no simple courier. In the inner circles of the Miamis, she had a voice and a vote in the most critical decisions. Her opinion carried as much weight as Artemio's on logistical matters. So trusted and capable was she that she eventually commanded her own operational team, a small crew loyal directly to her. On the streets, it was said she was feared and respected in equal terrifying measure by both her partners and her enemies. She was known to be ruthless in business and unforgiving in conflict. Her power base was a rural property she owned, a finca located in the quiet, unassuming town of Villanueva de Perales on the outskirts of Madrid. To the neighbors, it was just another country estate. In reality, she had transformed it into a state-of-the-art cocaine production laboratory, an industrial hub hidden in the Spanish countryside. With the assistance of 4 expert chemists brought in directly from Colombia, known as cooks, she was producing cocaine at a purity level of up to 71%, a product so potent it dominated any market it touched. The laboratory was a testament to her professionalism. It was equipped with heavy industrial machinery, hydraulic presses for compacting the drug into bricks, custom-made metal molds, industrial ovens for drying, chemical reactors, and hundreds of drums filled with precursor chemicals like acetone and hydrochloric acid. It wasn't just a lab, it was a factory. Inside, police would later find extraction manuals, fake labels designed to make the chemicals look like legitimate industrial supplies, and sophisticated industrial ventilation systems installed specifically to disperse the pungent, telltale chemical odors that could have given the operation away. When it was finally discovered in 2010, the laboratory at Villanueva de Perales was immediately hailed as the largest and most sophisticated cocaine lab ever found in all of Europe. The subsequent raid was massive. Police seized 277 kilograms of nearly pure cocaine, 45 massive drums of acetone, over 200 liters of other essential chemicals, encrypted mobile phones, vehicles, and a treasure trove of financial documents that painted a clear picture of an international distribution network. The empire of the Miamis from the outside seemed impenetrable, a fortress of crime built on money and fear. But behind the facade of invincibility, the authorities on both sides of the Atlantic had been working silently, painstakingly for years to bring it all crashing down. They were building a case brick by brick, waiting for the one critical break that would open the floodgates. That break came from the most unexpected and devastating source, the betrayed wife of Álvaro López Tardón. Her name was Sharon. She was an American citizen, a woman who had shared Álvaro's life during his most extravagant years in Miami. Sharon had been a direct first-hand witness to the fairy tale. She had lived in the luxurious mansion, driven the fast cars, and worn the expensive jewelry. But she had also lived with the dark underbelly of that life, the constant intimidation, the veiled and not-so-veiled threats, and the creeping corrosive paranoia that surrounded her husband like a fog. According to sealed judicial documents, their relationship deteriorated in direct proportion to his criminal success. As his wealth grew, he became more controlling, more violent. The man who could charm a room could also terrorize a home. There were episodes of physical aggression, of forced isolation, where she was cut off from friends and family. In a move of profound foresight and fear, Sharon had secretly installed hidden cameras throughout their home. The footage captured on those cameras was chilling. They showed her husband's violent, unhinged reaction the moment she finally gathered the courage to ask him for a divorce. In one harrowing sequence, Álvaro can be seen grabbing a kitchen knife and physically threatening her, holding the blade to her neck, his eyes empty of the man she once knew. Terrified for her own life, and more pressingly, for the safety of their young son, Sharon made a decision that would alter the course of the investigation. She broke the silence that had been suffocating her. She walked into a field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, and offered them something they could never have seized in a raid: internal testimony. She handed over evidence that became the linchpin of the entire case. She provided the secret recordings from her home, capturing his violence and his admissions. She delivered boxes of financial documents, bank statements, and shell company details that Álvaro thought were hidden. She gave them the logistical details of his operations, the names of his associates, and crucially, the exact locations of the hidden compartments in the garage, the paint cans and secret floor safes stuffed with cash. Her collaboration was the game changer. It gave the agencies in the United States and Spain the final piece of the puzzle, allowing them to coordinate the biggest joint strike in the history of the fight against the clan. On the 17th of July, 2011, they launched Operation Aelia. In a perfectly synchronized transatlantic operation involving Spain's national police, the American Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, and the FBI, they executed simultaneous raids in Miami and Madrid. At Álvaro's luxurious mansion in South Beach, agents didn't just find drugs. They found the architecture of his financial empire. They discovered the hidden compartments inside the paint cans, overflowing with cash. They seized a collection of luxury watches worth a fortune. They bagged incriminating bank documents, and they took possession of the fleet of cars, a motorcade valued in the millions, a testament to his greed. Simultaneously, in the upscale neighborhood of La Moraleja in Madrid, a different team of agents was making a discovery of their own. Behind a false wall in a specially constructed underground bunker, they found a sight that stunned even the most seasoned investigators. 24 million euros in cash, stacked in neat bricks of bills, the liquid heart of the criminal enterprise, now cold and still. In the same operation, they successfully arrested his brother, Artemio, finally severing the head of the snake on both continents. Álvaro López Tardón was immediately transferred to a maximum security federal prison in the United States. He was formally charged with money laundering on an epic scale and conspiracy to distribute cocaine. The sentence handed down by the American court was not just a punishment, it was a statement. It was a number designed to ensure he would never see freedom again. 150 years in federal prison, a life sentence without the possibility of parole, effectively a death sentence behind bars. In Spain, the legal proceedings were no less monumental. The National Court of Spain, the Audiencia Nacional, opened a macro trial, a sprawling legal process involving more than 80 individual defendants, from the brothers' inner circle to the street-level distributors and the frontmen who signed the papers. The weight of the evidence was crushing. Faced with decades in prison, many of the accused chose to strike deals with the prosecution, pleading guilty in exchange for reduced sentences. For the first time, some of them broke their code of silence and spoke publicly about the inner workings of the clan. One defendant, a mid-level manager in their operation, confessed to the tribunal with a mix of arrogance and shock. "We always knew what we were doing was illegal," he stated. "But none of us ever imagined we would all fall at the same time. The money, the power, it made us feel invincible." Ana Maria Cameno, the so-called Queen of Coke, sat in the dock, a figure of defiance. She accepted the factual basis of the prosecution's case, admitting to the existence of the lab and her role. However, when asked by the judge if she accepted the corresponding sentences being sought, her answer was a firm, simple no. The prosecutor pressed her. "You are here accused of crimes against public health, money laundering, and illegal possession of weapons. In relation to each of these three crimes, do you agree with the facts as they are reflected in the indictment as they pertain to you?" After a pause, she answered, "Yes." "And with the respective penalties requested for each of them?" the judge asked. "No," she said through her lawyer. "No, thank you." In her defense, she later tried to paint a picture of herself as a pawn. "I didn't direct anything," she claimed, her voice trying to find a note of victimhood. "I just did what they asked me to do. They used me as a scapegoat. I am here paying for the sins of the men who gave the orders." Artemio López Tardón, ever the more reserved of the two brothers, faced the Spanish court with a different strategy. He was ultimately sentenced for money laundering and for belonging to a criminal organization, but he managed to avoid the more serious, direct charges of drug trafficking. Before the judge, he adopted the persona of the aggrieved businessman. "I have never trafficked in drugs," he stated flatly. "What I did was move money, manage assets, the same as thousands of other entrepreneurs do every day in this country. My only mistake was the origin of the capital." Operation Aelia became an instant case study, a shining example for law enforcement agencies worldwide. It was a masterclass in international police cooperation, a testament to what could be achieved when agencies shared intelligence and acted in unison. The message it sent to the criminal underworld was loud and clear. Even the most sophisticated, most secretive organizations could be brought to their knees if you cut off the flow of money. The violence could be hidden, the product could be disguised, but the money always left a trail. And if you followed it to the end, you would find the kingpins. The dramatic fall of the principal leaders, however, did not mean the immediate end of the Miamis. In the criminal world, nature abhors a vacuum. After the mass arrests of 2011, a fierce, covert struggle for control began over the remnants of the shattered organization. The group, once a cohesive empire, fragmented into warring factions. Old alliances, forged in blood and greed, curdled overnight into lethal enmities. The men who had once shared the profits of a multi-ton shipment were now willing to kill each other for control of a single remaining contact or a stash of unsold product. In 2012, Madrid and its suburbs registered a spike in violent incidents, many of which were directly connected to former members of the Miamis. Several ex-members of the organization began to systematically eliminate each other. The motives were twofold: fear of being betrayed by those who knew their secrets, and the brutal winner-takes-all dispute over the few remaining assets, the still active drug routes, and the contacts in Colombia that hadn't been burned by the police. One of the darkest and most shocking episodes of this post-empire bloodbath was the murder of Ricardo Rojas, known on the streets as Richie. Richie was a historical figure within the group, one of the original kingpins from the early days, hailing originally from Colombia. On the 12th of March 2018, his life was brutally ended. He was executed with 10 gunshots, a fusillade of bullets that tore through him in the wealthy Madrid suburb of Pozuelo de Alarcón. The most chilling detail of his murder was the setting. It happened in front of his own 5-year-old son. The hitmen, professionals, vanished without a trace, leaving no witnesses but the traumatized child. Investigators, however, had little doubt. The crime was immediately attributed to a settling of accounts within the increasingly toxic Madrid narcotics scene. Richie had been identified in previous police investigations as one of Juan Carlos Peña's most trusted men back in the 90s, and later a key collaborator for the López Tardón brothers. He had survived the initial purges and the police raids, but he couldn't survive the ensuing chaos. After the clan's collapse, he had tried to remain active, operating at a smaller, more cautious scale. His death was interpreted by those in the know as a stark, brutal message echoing through the underworld. No one was ever truly safe. The past was never the past. During this turbulent period of fragmentation, there were also whispers and unconfirmed reports of disappearances. Several former low-level collaborators who had chosen to testify or provide statements to the prosecution were never seen again. They vanished from their homes, their lives, their families. One of the reserved police reports, parts of which were later leaked to the press in 2019, painted a grim picture of the aftermath. It stated, in the clinical language of law enforcement, "The decomposition of the primary organization has triggered a wave of retaliatory killings among former allies. The absence of a clear hierarchical structure has devolved into an all-out war between rival factions, each claiming legitimacy and control over the remaining assets." The fear of these reprisals became so pervasive that it drove some lower-ranking members to seek refuge in Spain's witness protection program, trading their safety for their testimony. Others, those who couldn't or wouldn't testify, chose a different path. They went into self-imposed exile, fleeing the country, or they simply cut all ties with the criminal world, disappearing into the anonymity of a normal life, forever looking over their shoulder. This internal war, this bloody coda to the main story, marked the definitive end of the Miamis as any kind of organized structure. The empire was not just dismantled by the police, it was devoured by its own. Although their criminal enterprise was ultimately shattered, the case of the Miamis carved a deep and lasting scar on the landscape of Spanish and European organized crime. The sheer magnitude of their operations, their adoption of a corporate business model for crime, and the chilling sophistication of their international networks marked a definitive turning point. It was a clear before and after for both law enforcement agencies and the criminal organizations that would seek to follow in their footsteps. The techniques pioneered and perfected by the group, from the systematic use of frontmen and shell corporations to hide their wealth, to the establishment of completely independent logistical routes for transforming and distributing cocaine deep within Europe, became a template. After the Miamis fell, other, newer clans studied their methods and replicated them, learning from both their successes and their mistakes. The laboratory at Villanueva de Perales, that industrial marvel of criminal chemistry, was cited for years in classified reports by Europol, the European Union's law enforcement agency, as a key example of the worrying trend towards the industrialization of drug trafficking directly on European soil. It showed that the Colombians no longer needed to send a finished product. They could send the knowledge and the raw materials and manufacture the final product at the doorstep of the consumer. Today, the key players of this saga are scattered across prison cells, their fates sealed by the empire they built. Álvaro López Tardón remains incarcerated in the United States, serving his colossal sentence in a maximum security federal prison. According to periodic prison documents and reports from his legal team, he has launched multiple appeals over the years, desperate attempts to have his sentence reviewed or reduced. Each attempt has been met with failure, the American judicial system unmoved by the pleas of a man who once flaunted his wealth so arrogantly. He is a ghost in a jumpsuit, a millionaire with no access to his millions, living out his days in a concrete box. Artemio, his brother, faced a comparatively lighter sentence. He was convicted and sentenced to 3.5 years in a Spanish prison and ordered to pay a staggering fine of 85 million euros, a symbolic clawing back of the fortune he helped launder. His time behind bars was shorter, but the financial ruin and the stain of his conviction are permanent. Ana Maria Cameno, the Queen of Coke, continues to serve her sentence in a women's prison in Spain. She was ultimately convicted and sentenced to 16 years in prison and ordered to pay a fine of 21 million euros. From within the prison walls, she has occasionally given interviews or made statements through her lawyers, maintaining her narrative of victimhood. She has declared that she was merely a useful tool, a piece on the chessboard for the real kingpins who escaped justice, and that her sentence was grotesquely disproportionate to her actual role. The dismantling of the Miamis signified more than just the arrest of a few individuals. It meant the complete dissolution of one of the most feared and, in some twisted circles, admired networks in the history of Spanish organized crime. They were a name that commanded respect and terror, but their legacy, the sophisticated methods they pioneered, and the massive power vacuum they left behind still echo in the margins of today's drug trade. The strategies they developed are still used. The contacts they forged, some of which remain unbroken, still facilitate the flow of cocaine into Europe. Their story serves as a dark template for the next generation of criminal entrepreneurs. This, then, was the story of the Miamis. They were not simply a band of drug traffickers who got rich and got caught. They were much more than that. They were the living, breathing reflection of a new era in organized crime. An era that was more global, more interconnected, more sophisticated, and infinitely more difficult to trace than the old days of street-level gangs. Their story, a tapestry woven from violence, extravagant luxury, and ultimate betrayal, perfectly represents the archetypal arc of a criminal elite, the meteoric ascent and the devastating fall. They were a group of people who, for a time, genuinely believed they had become untouchable, that their money and power placed them beyond the reach of the law. Their downfall left a clear, undeniable lesson for law enforcement agencies around the world, a lesson that has become a cornerstone of modern investigative technique. Following the money is always more effective than following the bullets. Bullets end a life, but following the money ends an empire. What did you think of their incredible, brutal story? A story of brothers, betrayal, and billions. Let us know in the comments below. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the heart of the Spanish underworld, please don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit that notification bell so you never miss another story. We'll see you in the next one. But to truly understand the depth of their criminal genius and the sheer scale of their downfall, we must rewind and examine the intricate machinery they built, piece by bloody piece. The story of the Miamis is not just a linear tale of rise and fall. It is a complex web of connections, a deep dive into the very soul of modern organized crime. Their operations were a hydra with multiple heads that needed to be severed simultaneously, and it was the meticulous, often tedious work of financial investigators that finally provided the sword. The relationship between Álvaro in Miami and Artemio in Madrid was the central nervous system of the entire enterprise. It was a partnership built on absolute, if ultimately misplaced, trust. Their communication was a masterclass in operational security. They never spoke directly about drugs or money on unsecured lines. Instead, they used a coded language, speaking in vague terms about merchandise, clients, and investments. They would meet in person only a handful of times a year, always in neutral, carefully chosen locations: a quiet cafe in Zurich, a private villa in Marbella, a luxury hotel in Panama City. These meetings were planned with the precision of a military operation. Artemio would fly in under a false name, using a circuitous route to shake off any potential surveillance. Álvaro would arrive separately, often by private jet, his arrival time to coincide with a legitimate business meeting or a social event. In these clandestine summits, they would review the state of their empire. Artemio would report on the flow of product from Colombia, the purity levels coming out of Comeno's lab, the payments from distributors across Spain and beyond. Álvaro would update him on the laundering operations, the new real estate acquisitions in Florida, the performance of their stock portfolio, the discrete deposits in Swiss and Andorran bank accounts. They were, in effect, two CEOs running a multinational corporation, their boardroom a different airport lounge each time, their quarterly reports delivered in hushed tones over glasses of expensive wine. The financial architecture they built was a thing of terrifying beauty. Álvaro, the architect, understood that cash was a liability. A suitcase full of $100 bills is heavy, bulky, and suspicious. His genius lay in transforming that physical weight into invisible, electronic wealth. He employed a small army of financial advisors, some knowing, some unknowing, who helped him navigate the complex world of international finance. He used a technique known as smurfing or structuring, where large amounts of cash are broken down into smaller, less conspicuous deposits just under the $10,000 reporting threshold in the US. He would have multiple individuals, all trusted associates or unsuspecting employees of his businesses, deposit these smaller sums into various bank accounts on the same day, spreading the money across different banks and different branches to avoid triggering automatic alarms. But that was just the beginning. The real magic happened when the money entered the legitimate economy. He would use these cleaned funds to purchase assets that could be easily sold or used as collateral for loans, further obscuring the original source of the wealth. The luxury car dealerships he invested in were perfect for this. A customer would buy a Lamborghini with a cashier's check, a check that originated from a seemingly legitimate business. The car would be sold and the profit would be taxed, making the money officially clean. The art collection served a similar purpose. An original Basquiat or Haring, purchased with laundered money, could be stored in a climate-controlled vault, appreciating in value, a silent, beautiful repository for illicit wealth that could be sold at any time, the proceeds then appearing as a legitimate capital gain. While Álvaro worked his financial alchemy in the United States, Artemio was the master of the physical product. The route from the coca fields of the Andes to the streets of Europe was long and perilous, and it was his job to ensure it remained open and secure. He cultivated relationships with multiple Colombian supplier groups, never relying on a single source, a classic strategy to avoid being cut off if one network was compromised. These Colombian connections were the lifeblood of the operation. They provided not only the raw cocaine paste, but also the expertise. The cooks who worked in Ana Maria Comeno's lab were all Colombian nationals, brought to Spain on fake passports and paid handsomely for their silence. They lived in guarded compounds, rarely allowed to leave, their only purpose to transform the raw paste into the pure white powder that would flood the European market. Artemio's logistical network was a marvel of corruption and cunning. He had paid informants within the port authorities not just in Valencia, but also in Algeciras and Barcelona. These eyes would tip him off about upcoming inspections, allowing him to reroute shipments or delay their arrival. He used a fleet of trucks with hidden compartments, some so sophisticated they required a hydraulic lift to access, to move the cocaine from the ports to safe houses scattered across the Spanish countryside. These safe houses were never owned by anyone connected to the organization. They were rented through front men using false identities and were changed every few months to avoid detection. The cocaine would be stored there temporarily, often for only a few days, before being moved again, either to Comeno's lab for processing or directly to distributors. The lab itself was the crown jewel of their operation. It was not a makeshift operation in a basement. It was a purpose-built industrial facility. The finca in Villanueva de Perales was chosen for its isolation, its large outbuildings, and its proximity to Madrid, the main market. The neighbors were few and far between, and those that existed were either paid off or too intimidated to ask questions. The main building was reinforced, the windows blacked out. Inside, the air was thick with the acrid smell of chemicals, a smell that the industrial ventilation system worked overtime to mask. The Colombian cooks worked in shifts, their days and nights blending into one as they oversaw the complex chemical processes. They would start with the base, the cocaine paste, which was a beige, lumpy substance. Through a series of washes with acetone and hydrochloric acid, they would purify it, removing the impurities and raising the purity level to its maximum. Then came the cooking process, where the purified paste was mixed with other chemicals to create the final crystalline powder. Finally, it was pressed into 1-kilogram bricks using the hydraulic presses, each brick wrapped in multiple layers of plastic and wax to preserve it and hide the smell. The lab was a non-stop factory, producing kilogram after kilogram of the purest cocaine Europe had ever seen. Ana Maria Cameno's role went beyond just running the lab. She was also a key negotiator with the Colombians. Her knowledge of the chemical process gave her a unique credibility. She could discuss purity levels, production timelines, and pricing with the same authority as any cartel chemist. She was the bridge between the raw material and the finished product, and she wielded that power with a ruthless efficiency. She was known to be a tough negotiator, driving a hard bargain with the suppliers, demanding the best price for the best quality. In the male-dominated world of drug trafficking, she was an anomaly, a woman who had fought her way to the top through sheer competence and an iron will. She was not just a figurehead, she was a force of nature, and her nickname, the Queen of Coke, was earned, not gifted. The investigation into the Miamis was a marathon, not a sprint. It began in earnest in the mid-2000s, shortly after the López Tardón brothers consolidated their power. The Spanish police, working in close collaboration with Europol, and eventually the DEA and FBI, began to build a case. They started with the street-level dealers, the small fish. By turning these low-level operatives, offering them deals in exchange for information, they began to piece together the structure of the organization. They learned about Artemio's role as the logistical chief, about the network of frontmen, about the safe houses and the distribution routes. But the top of the pyramid, Álvaro in Miami, remained a distant, untouchable figure. The money trail was the key, but it was incredibly complex. The investigators spent years following the money, tracing it from the street corners of Madrid through a labyrinth of shell companies and bank accounts in tax havens. They worked with financial intelligence units in multiple countries, slowly untangling the web that Álvaro had so carefully woven. They identified the real estate purchases in Florida, the luxury car dealerships, the art acquisitions. They built a financial profile of Álvaro that showed a man with no legitimate source of income spending millions of dollars. It was circumstantial, but it was powerful. The breakthrough, however, came not from a financial analyst, but from a broken heart. Sharon, Álvaro's wife, was the key that unlocked the entire case. Her testimony was devastating. She didn't just provide evidence, she provided context. She explained the coded language he used, the names of his associates, the layout of his hidden compartments. She led the FBI to the paint cans in the garage, the secret floor safe in the closet. Her hidden camera footage was the most damning evidence of all. It showed Álvaro not as a sophisticated businessman, but as a violent, paranoid criminal. It showed him threatening her, his face contorted with rage, a kitchen knife in his hand. It humanized the monster, but in doing so, it made him infinitely more culpable. Her decision to cooperate was an act of immense courage, born of sheer terror. She knew the risks. She knew that by talking, she was signing her own social death warrant and putting a target on her back. But she also knew that staying silent meant a lifetime of fear, a lifetime of looking over her shoulder. She chose freedom, and in doing so, she doomed her husband. Operation Aelia was the culmination of years of work. The name itself was chosen carefully. The azalea is a beautiful flower, but it is also highly toxic if ingested. It was a perfect metaphor for the Miamis, a beautiful, glamorous facade hiding a deadly poison. The raids were executed with breathtaking precision. At 6:32 a.m. on July 17, 2011, teams in Miami and Madrid moved simultaneously. In Miami, FBI agents swarmed Álvaro's South Beach mansion. They breached the door with a battering ram and flooded the house, their guns drawn. Álvaro was dragged from his bed, still in his silk pajamas, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. He was read his rights and led away in handcuffs, his reign of luxury ending in a moment of utter humiliation. The agents then began the meticulous process of searching the property. They found the hidden compartments exactly where Sharon had told them to look. They pulled out stacks of cash, jewelry, and documents. They photographed the fleet of cars, the art on the walls, the opulent furniture. It was a scene of wealth beyond imagination, now being catalogued as evidence of a crime. In Madrid, the scene was similar. Police raided Artemio's home in La Moraleja, a luxurious suburban villa. He was also arrested without incident, but the most dramatic discovery was yet to come. In a secret underground bunker, accessible only through a hidden panel in the floor of a closet, they found it. 24 million euros in cash. The money was stacked in neat bundles wrapped in plastic, filling the small room from floor to ceiling. It was a breathtaking sight, a physical manifestation of the scale of their operation. The officers on the scene stood in stunned silence, staring at a fortune that most people could only dream of. It was the smoking gun, the undeniable proof of their guilt. The aftermath of the raids was a media frenzy. The story of the Miamis, with its glamorous setting, its violent history, and its larger-than-life characters, was a gift to the press. Newspapers and television channels competed for the most lurid details. Álvaro's luxury cars were photographed from every angle. Ana Maria Cameno was given her now famous nickname. The public was fascinated and horrified in equal measure. The trial in Spain was a spectacle. The Audiencia Nacional, housed in a sprawling complex on the outskirts of Madrid, became the stage for the final act of the Miami's drama. Day after day, the accused were led into the courtroom, a parade of former kingpins and low-level henchmen. The testimony was often gripping, revealing the inner workings of the organization in vivid detail. Witnesses described the violence, the fear, the paranoia. They talked about the money, the drugs, the women. It was a story of excess and depravity, and the public couldn't get enough. The trial at the Audiencia Nacional was a stark, fluorescent-lit stage where the last act of the Miami's drama played out in painstaking detail. The accused sat in the glass-enclosed dock, a grim tableau of fallen power. Álvaro, of course, was absent, his fate already sealed in an American courtroom, but his presence loomed over the proceedings. Artemio, dressed in a somber suit, sat rigidly, his face a mask of controlled detachment. He rarely looked at the witnesses, preferring to stare straight ahead at the judges as if willing them to understand his version of events. Ana Maria Cameno, the Queen of Coke, was a study in contrasts. Some days she appeared defiant, her chin held high, her eyes scanning the public gallery as if searching for a friendly face. On other days, she seemed diminished, her shoulders hunched, her gaze fixed on the table in front of her, the weight of her impending sentence pressing down on her like a physical force. The prosecution's case was a mountain of evidence. They presented the financial records, the wiretap transcripts, the witness testimonies. They showed photographs of the lab in Villanueva de Perales, the hydraulic presses, the drums of chemicals, the stacks of finished cocaine bricks. They played recordings of phone calls where Artemio could be heard discussing shipments and clients in his carefully coded language. The sheer volume of the evidence was overwhelming, a tidal wave of incrimination that threatened to drown the defendants. One by one, the lesser members of the organization took the stand, many of them having already struck deals with the prosecution. They described the hierarchy, the payoffs, the violence. They named names and pointed fingers. Their testimonies painted a picture of a ruthless, efficient criminal machine, one that operated with the precision of a corporate board and the brutality of a street gang. One of the most compelling witnesses was a former bodyguard for Artemio, a man named Javier who had been with the organization for years. He was a hulking figure, his face scarred from a past knife fight, but in the witness box he seemed almost vulnerable, his voice quiet and hesitant. He described the fear that permeated the organization, the constant paranoia, the knowledge that a single mistake could cost you your life. He talked about the loyalty that was demanded and the betrayal that was always expected. He recounted an incident where a low-level dealer was suspected of skimming money from a sale. The man was brought to a warehouse on the outskirts of Madrid. Javier was ordered to beat him to send a message. He did it, he said, because he was afraid of what would happen if he refused. He described the sound of the man's screams, the crunch of bone under his fists, the look of terror in the man's eyes. It was a chilling testimony, a glimpse into the soul of an organization built on fear. When the defense lawyer asked him why he was testifying now, after years of silence, Javier looked down at his hands and said simply, "Because I don't want to die in prison, and I don't want to be looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life." His words hung in the air, a stark reminder of the human cost of the Miami's empire. Ana Maria Cameno's defense was a masterclass in strategic victimhood. Her lawyer, a sharp silver-haired man known for his work with high-profile clients, painted her as a woman manipulated by powerful men. He argued that she was a single mother who had fallen in with the wrong crowd, a skilled chemist who had been exploited by the López Tardón brothers. He pointed out that she had never been accused of violence, that her role was purely technical. He presented her as a pawn, a useful tool that the real kingpins had used and then discarded. Cameno herself took the stand in her own defense. She was composed, articulate, and carefully emotional. She spoke of her difficult childhood, her struggle to provide for her children, her initial involvement in the drug trade as a small-time dealer. She admitted to running the lab, but she insisted that she was following orders, that she had no real power in the organization. "They told me what to do," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "They brought me the materials, they brought me the chemists. I just made sure the work got done. I never made any decisions. I never saw the big picture. I was just a worker, like any other." It was a compelling performance, but the prosecution was ready. They presented evidence of her negotiations with the Colombians, her independent control over the lab's operations, her ownership of the finca. They showed that she was not just a worker, she was a partner, a key player with significant authority and a substantial share of the profits. The image of the victimized single mother began to crumble under the weight of the evidence. Artemio's defense was more straightforward. He simply denied everything. He took the stand in his own defense and, in a calm, measured tone, painted himself as a legitimate businessman who had been caught up in a misunderstanding. He admitted to knowing his brother, of course, and to having business dealings with him. But he insisted that those dealings were legitimate. The real estate, the car dealerships, the investments, all of it, he claimed, was funded by legitimate business profits. He had no knowledge of any drug trafficking, he said. He had no idea that his brother was involved in such things. When confronted with the wiretap recordings, he dismissed them as ambiguous, taken out of context. When shown the financial records, he claimed they were complex but legitimate. He was calm, unflappable, a study in controlled denial. But the prosecution had a powerful weapon, the testimony of his former associates. One by one they took the stand and contradicted him. They described meetings where Artemio gave direct orders about shipments. They talked about payments they had made to him, cash delivered in suitcases. They painted a picture of a man who was not just aware of the drug trafficking, but was its central logistical commander. Artemio's calm facade began to show cracks. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed. But he never broke, never deviated from his story. The trial dragged on for months. Witness after witness took the stand. Documents were poured over. Lawyers made impassioned speeches. The public gallery was often packed with journalists, curious onlookers, and the families of the accused. The story of the Miamis had become a national obsession, a real-life crime drama that was more compelling than any fiction. The press coverage was relentless. Every twist and turn of the trial was reported in breathless detail. The defendants became celebrities of a sort, their faces splashed across the front pages of newspapers and leading the evening news broadcasts. Ana Maria Cameno, in particular, became a tabloid fixture. Her every outfit, her every expression in court was analyzed and dissected. She was portrayed alternately as a cold-hearted criminal mastermind and a tragic figure brought low by her own ambition. The truth, as always, was somewhere in between. Behind the scenes, the families of the accused were living their own private dramas. The wives, the children, the parents, they all struggled to cope with the sudden violent intrusion of the law into their lives. They faced public shame, financial ruin, and the constant fear of reprisals from rival gangs or from former associates seeking to silence anyone who might talk. Some of them rallied around the accused, visiting them in prison, maintaining a facade of normalcy. Others, like Sharon, had already chosen their path, opting for freedom and safety over loyalty to a doomed cause. The human cost of the Miami's empire extended far beyond the men and women in the dock. It touched the lives of everyone connected to them, leaving a trail of broken families and shattered dreams. The investigation into the Miamis had also revealed the extent of their corruption. Several low-level port officials were arrested and charged with accepting bribes. A few mid-level businessmen who had acted as frontmen for the organization were also implicated. But the investigation stopped short of reaching into the higher echelons of power. There were whispers, unconfirmed rumors, that the Miamis had paid off politicians or police officers, but no evidence ever surfaced to support these claims. The investigation remained focused on the criminal organization itself, leaving the question of broader corruption tantalizingly unanswered. This lack of closure fueled speculation and conspiracy theories, adding another layer of intrigue to an already complex story. Some believed that the Miamis had been protected by powerful figures, that their fall was not the result of good police work, but of a political decision to cut them loose. Others dismissed these theories as the fantasies of a public hungry for a more dramatic narrative. The truth, as is often the case, was probably more mundane. The Miamis were a criminal organization, and they were caught because they got sloppy, because they trusted the wrong people, because their ambition finally outpaced their caution. The international dimension of the case was also a source of fascination. The cooperation between the Spanish police, the DEA, and the FBI was held up as a model of transatlantic law enforcement collaboration. It showed that in the fight against organized crime, borders were increasingly meaningless. The criminals might be global, but so were the agencies pursuing them. The case also highlighted the role of Europol, the European Union's law enforcement agency, which had helped coordinate the intelligence sharing and provided analytical support. The Miamis were not just a Spanish problem, they were a European problem, and their downfall was a victory for international cooperation. The lesson was clear. To defeat global crime, you need a global response. As the trial in Madrid entered its final phase, the focus shifted to the closing arguments. The prosecution delivered a powerful, hours-long summation, meticulously recapping the evidence and painting a damning picture of a sophisticated criminal enterprise. They called for maximum sentences for all the main defendants, arguing that they had shown no remorse and that their crimes had caused immense harm to society. The defense lawyers in turn made their final pleas for leniency. They argued that their clients were not the masterminds the prosecution claimed, that they were victims of circumstance, that they deserved a second chance. Ana Maria Comeno's lawyer made an especially emotional appeal, urging the judges to see his client as a human being, a mother, a woman who had made mistakes but who was not a monster. Artemio's lawyer stuck to his strategy of denial, insisting that the evidence was circumstantial and that his client was innocent of the most serious charges. The judges retired to consider their verdicts. The waiting period was agonizing for the defendants and their families. Days turned into weeks. The press continued to speculate, offering their own predictions and analyses. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the court reconvened to deliver its judgment. The courtroom was packed. The atmosphere was electric with tension. The defendants sat in the dock, their faces pale and drawn. The presiding judge began to read the verdict, his voice flat and unemotional. One by one, the names were called and the sentences were announced. The lesser members of the organization received relatively short sentences, a few years in prison, a reflection of their cooperation with the prosecution. Then came the main players. Ana Maria Comeno was found guilty on all major charges. The judge sentenced her to 16 years in prison and ordered her to pay a fine of 21 million euros. She showed no emotion as the sentence was read, her face a frozen mask. Artemio López Tardón was found guilty of money laundering and belonging to a criminal organization, but, as expected, was acquitted of the more serious drug trafficking charges. He was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison and fined 85 million euros. He absorbed the news with the same stoic calm he had maintained throughout the trial, a faint flicker of relief perhaps crossing his features at the relatively light sentence. The verdicts were met with a mixture of reactions. The prosecution expressed satisfaction, hailing the sentences as a just outcome. The defense lawyers promised to appeal, arguing that the sentences were too harsh. The public, following the case through the media, had their own opinions. Some felt justice had been served, that the kingpins of the Miamis had finally been brought low. Others thought the sentences were too lenient, that 16 years for the Queen of Coke was a slap on the wrist for the damage she had caused. The debate would continue for years, a footnote to the larger story of the clan's rise and fall. But for the moment, the legal process was over. The Miamis, as an organized entity, were no more. Their leaders were behind bars, their assets seized, their empire in ruins. The chapter was closed. The closing of the trial, however, did not bring closure to the story of the Miamis. In many ways, it was merely the beginning of a new, more shadowy chapter. The sentences were read, the gavel fell, and the defendants were led away to begin their punishments. But the echoes of their empire continued to reverberate through the criminal underworld and the lives of those they had touched. The fall of the Miamis created a power vacuum that others were all too eager to fill, and the years that followed were marked by a brutal, often invisible struggle for control of the remnants of their once mighty organization. Artemio López Tardón, having received a relatively light sentence of 3.5 years, was transferred to a medium-security prison on the outskirts of Madrid. It was a far cry from the luxury he had once enjoyed, but compared to his brother's fate, it was almost tolerable. He was housed in a modest cell, his days structured around prison routines, meals, exercise periods, and the occasional visit from his lawyer or family members. He maintained his stoic demeanor, keeping to himself, avoiding the prison's internal politics. He was, in many ways, a ghost in the system, a man who had fallen from unimaginable heights to the gray anonymity of incarceration. His prison was not the violent, gang-dominated institution often portrayed in films. It was a more mundane place, filled with men serving time for a variety of crimes, from petty theft to white-collar fraud. Artemio, with his quiet manners and his obvious intelligence, was something of an anomaly. He was treated with a certain respect by both inmates and guards, a recognition of his former status, but he remained isolated, a man alone with his thoughts and his regrets. Ana Maria Cameno's imprisonment was a different story. She was sent to a women's prison in central Spain, a facility known for its harsh conditions and its population of difficult inmates. The Queen of Coke, as the other prisoners quickly learned, was not a queen in this new world. She was just another inmate, and her notoriety made her a target. She faced constant taunts, threats, and attempts at intimidation from other prisoners who saw her as a symbol of everything they despised: wealth, privilege, and the arrogance of power. She had to learn to navigate this new, dangerous social landscape, to forge alliances, to project strength while hiding her fear. It was a brutal education, but she was a survivor. She had fought her way to the top of a criminal empire. She could fight her way through a prison yard. She found a small group of women she could trust, other inmates serving time for drug-related offenses, and together they formed a protective circle. She spent her days working in the prison laundry, a menial job that was a far cry from running a cocaine laboratory, but it gave her structure and a small measure of purpose. She received letters from her children, carefully censored by the prison authorities, and she clung to those thin sheets of paper as lifelines to the outside world. The 16-year sentence loomed over her like a mountain, but she was determined to climb it, one day at a time. In the United States, Álvaro López Tardón was experiencing a very different kind of incarceration. He was held in a maximum security federal prison, a facility designed to house the most dangerous criminals in the country. His world was a concrete and steel cage, a monotonous routine of lockdowns, counts, and limited human contact. The 150-year sentence was, for all practical purposes, a death sentence. He would never leave prison alive. The knowledge of this, the absolute finality of his fate, was a weight that pressed down on him constantly. He spent his days in his cell, reading, writing letters, and staring at the walls. He had few visitors. His family was in Spain, and the cost and complexity of traveling to the US were prohibitive. His lawyers visited occasionally, but their news was always the same. His appeals had been denied, his requests for a sentence reduction rejected. He was alone, utterly and completely alone, with the consequences of his choices. The man who had once commanded a transatlantic empire, who had lived in a South Beach mansion and driven a Bugatti, was now a number, a name on a prison roster, a ghost in the American penal system. The luxury, the power, the women, it had all been an illusion, a fleeting dream that had dissolved into the harsh reality of a 6-9 cell. But the story of the Miamis was not just about the fate of its leaders. It was also about the legacy they left behind, the methods they pioneered, and the void they created. In the years following Operation Aelia, the Spanish drug trade underwent a significant transformation. The Miamis had been the dominant player, a giant whose shadow covered the entire market. With their removal, a host of smaller, more agile groups emerged, each vying for a piece of the pie. Some were former members of the Miamis who had escaped arrest and were now trying to rebuild using the knowledge and contacts they had gained. Others were entirely new organizations, inspired by the Miami's success and eager to replicate their model. The landscape of the Spanish underworld became more fragmented, more competitive, and more violent. The days of a single dominant organization were over, replaced by a chaotic free-for-all where alliances shifted constantly and betrayal was the only constant. The methods pioneered by the Miamis became the standard for the new generation of traffickers. The use of front men and shell corporations to launder money, once a signature of the López Tardón brothers, became widespread. The establishment of clandestine labs within Europe, a tactic perfected by Ana Maria Cameno, was copied by other groups. The cultivation of corrupt contacts within ports and airports, a key element of Artemio's logistical network, became a standard practice. The Miamis, in their fall, had inadvertently created a template for the future of European drug trafficking. Their legacy was not just in the drugs they had moved or the money they had laundered. It was in the very structure of the criminal enterprise they had built. The violence that had always been a part of the Miami's story did not end with their arrest. In fact, it escalated. The power vacuum in Madrid and its surrounding areas became a battleground. Former associates, now rivals, fought for control of the remaining drug routes and distribution networks. The killings that had begun with the murder of Ricardo Rojas, Richie, continued. In 2019, a year after Richie's death, another former Miami's associate was gunned down in a busy Madrid street. The victim, a man known only by his alias El Gordo, had been a mid-level player in the organization, responsible for managing a network of street dealers in the southern districts of the city. He had been released from prison after serving a short sentence for drug possession and had tried to rebuild his life, opening a small bar in his old neighborhood. But the past was not done with him. One evening, as he was closing up for the night, two men on a motorcycle pulled up and sprayed his bar with automatic weapon fire. El Gordo was hit multiple times and died at the scene. The police investigation once again pointed to a settling of accounts within the remnants of the Miami's network. The message was clear: there was no escape from the world they had chosen. The fear of this ongoing violence drove many former members deeper into hiding. Some entered witness protection programs, their identities changed, their pasts erased, their lives forever defined by the threat of retaliation. Others fled the country, seeking refuge in South America or other parts of Europe, hoping that distance would provide safety. A few simply disappeared, vanishing from their homes and their lives, their fates unknown. The human cost of the Miami's empire continued to mount long after the leaders were behind bars. The families of the victims, the families of the perpetrators, all were caught in a cycle of violence and grief that showed no signs of ending. The police, for their part, continued to monitor the situation closely. They knew that the dismantling of the Miamis was not the end of the story, but merely the closing of one chapter. They maintained a presence in the neighborhoods that had been the clan's strongholds, watching for signs of resurgence. They cultivated informants within the new, smaller groups that had emerged, gathering intelligence on their operations. They worked with their international partners, sharing information about the evolving threat. The fight against drug trafficking was a never-ending war, and the victory over the Miamis was just one battle in a much larger conflict. The case of the Miamis also had a profound impact on Spanish society. It forced a national conversation about the nature of organized crime, its reach into everyday life, and its corrosive effects on communities. The image of the glamorous drug lord, the kingpin living a life of luxury, was shattered by the reality of the violence and misery that underpinned it. The public saw the photographs of Álvaro's mansion and his cars, but they also saw the photographs of the lab in Villanueva de Perales, the drums of chemicals, the stacks of cash. They saw the human cost in the faces of the victims and the families torn apart by addiction and violence. The story of the Miamis was a cautionary tale, a reminder that the drug trade was not a victimless crime, that the pursuit of easy money came at a terrible price. The media's role in shaping this narrative was significant. The press had at times glamorized the Miamis, giving them nicknames and treating their story as a kind of true crime entertainment. But in the aftermath of the trial, the tone shifted. The focus moved from the glamour to the grim reality. Journalists began to explore the social and economic conditions that had allowed the Miamis to flourish. The poverty and lack of opportunity in the barrios that had produced their foot soldiers, the corruption that had enabled their rise. The story became not just about a criminal gang, but about the failures of a society that had created the conditions for their existence. It was an uncomfortable conversation, but a necessary one. The legacy of the Miamis also extended to the realm of law enforcement. The success of Operation Aelia was held up as a model of international cooperation. The techniques used to zhuizong the money, to infiltrate the organization, to build a case that would stand up in court, were studied and refined. The case became a textbook example of how to dismantle a sophisticated criminal enterprise. Law enforcement agencies around the world sent teams to Spain and the US to learn from the experience. The Miamis, in their downfall, had inadvertently contributed to the professionalization of the fight against organized crime. But perhaps the most lasting legacy of the Miamis was the lesson they taught about the nature of power. They had built an empire based on fear and greed, and for a time it had seemed unassailable. They had believed themselves to be untouchable, above the law, beyond the reach of consequence. But in the end, they were brought down by the very things that had made them successful: their ambition, their greed, their willingness to trust no one. They were destroyed by their own paranoia, their own violence, their own inability to see that the house of cards they had built was always on the verge of collapse. The story of the Miamis is a timeless tale of hubris, a reminder that no matter how high you rise, the fall is always waiting. The years following the trial saw the gradual, often painful, reabsorption of the Miami's remnants into the broader fabric of European organized crime. The brothers' methods, once revolutionary, had become the new orthodoxy. The financial architecture they had perfected, the shell companies in tax havens, the layering of transactions through multiple jurisdictions, the investment in high-value assets, was now being taught in the unspoken curriculum of the criminal underworld. Young, ambitious traffickers studied the Miami's rise and fall like business school students dissecting the case of a failed corporation. They learned from their successes and, more importantly, from their mistakes. One of the most significant lessons was the danger of personal visibility. Álvaro's fatal flaw had been his inability to resist the spotlight. His mansion, his cars, his art collection, they had all made him a target. The new generation of traffickers understood that true power lay in anonymity. They built their empires from the shadows, living modest lives on the surface, while accumulating vast wealth through hidden networks. They avoided the flashy purchases that had so enamored Álvaro, opting instead for investments that drew no attention: modest homes in quiet neighborhoods, stakes in legitimate small businesses, portfolios of stocks and bonds held through nominee accounts. They learned that the goal was not to look rich, but to be rich, and that the two were not the same thing. The Colombian connection, so carefully cultivated by Artemio and Ana Maria Cameno, also evolved. The old cartels, the Medellin and Cali behemoths of the 80s and 90s, were long gone, replaced by a fragmented landscape of smaller, more specialized groups. These new Colombian organizations were more businesslike, less inclined to the spectacular violence of their predecessors. They were happy to supply the European market, but they demanded professionalism and reliability from their partners. The Miamis had provided that, and their fall left a gap that others were quick to fill. New alliances were forged between Spanish and Colombian traffickers, often facilitated by former Miami's associates who had escaped the net and were now freelancing their expertise. These men, with their deep knowledge of the European market and their contacts on both sides of the Atlantic, became invaluable assets, sought after by any group looking to establish a foothold in the cocaine trade. The port of Valencia, once a key entry point for the Miami's shipments, was heavily scrutinized in the aftermath of the investigation. Several officials were dismissed, security protocols were tightened, and for a time, the flow of drugs through the port slowed to a trickle. But the traffickers, as they always do, adapted. They shifted their operations to other ports, less guarded, less suspicious. Algeciras, in southern Spain, became a new hub, its vast container terminals providing ample opportunities for concealment. The port of Barcelona, too, saw an increase in drug seizures, a sign that the traffickers were spreading their risk, avoiding putting all their eggs in one basket. The cat-and-mouse game between law enforcement and the traffickers continued, an endless cycle of adaptation and counter-adaptation. Ana Maria Cameno, from her prison cell, watched these developments with a mixture of detachment and lingering interest. She received occasional visits from her lawyer, who kept her informed of the broader trends in the drug trade. She read newspapers and watched the news, piecing together a picture of the world she had left behind. She knew that her methods were being copied, that her legacy lived on in the labs that now dotted the Spanish countryside. It was a strange kind of immortality, a reminder that even in captivity, she remained a figure of significance. But the knowledge brought her little comfort. She was serving a 16-year sentence, a lifetime in the context of her current reality. The world outside was moving on without her, and she was trapped in a gray, monotonous existence, counting down the days until her possible release. Her life in prison had settled into a routine. She worked in the laundry, as she had from the beginning, finding a strange solace in the repetitive, mindless labor. The other inmates had, over time, accepted her presence. She was no longer the queen of coke, the target of their envy and resentment. She was just Anna, a middle-aged woman serving time, like them, for mistakes she had made. She had even made a few friends, women she trusted, women who had her back in the dangerous ecosystem of the prison. She spent her evenings in her cell, reading, writing letters to her children, and thinking about the past. The memories were a mixed blessing. Some brought a bittersweet nostalgia, reminders of the power and excitement of her former life. Others were painful, reminders of the violence, the fear, the constant paranoia that had defined those years. She often thought about the choices she had made, the paths not taken. Could she have lived a different life? A normal life with a normal job, a normal family? The question was unanswerable, a ghost that haunted her in the quiet hours of the night. Artemio, having served his relatively short sentence, was released from prison in 2015. He walked out of the gates a free man, but a man utterly transformed by his experience. The 3.5 years inside had aged him. His hair was gray, his face lined with worry. The stoic calm he had maintained throughout the trial had given way to a more fragile demeanor, a visible anxiety that lurked just beneath the surface. He had no money, no prospects, no future. The €85 million fine had stripped him of everything. His assets had been seized, his bank accounts emptied. He was destitute, a former kingpin reduced to relying on the charity of family members. He moved into a small apartment in a working-class neighborhood of Madrid, a far cry from the luxury he had once known. He kept a low profile, avoiding any contact with his former associates, trying to build a new life from the ashes of the old. But it was not easy. The stigma of his past followed him everywhere. He found it impossible to get a job. Who would hire a convicted money launderer, a man whose name had been splashed across the front pages of every newspaper in the country? He lived on a small stipend from his family, eking out a meager existence in the shadows of the city he had once controlled. He spent his days walking the streets of Madrid, a ghost haunting the scenes of his former triumphs. He would pass by the nightclubs he had once owned, now under new management. He would walk through the wealthy neighborhoods where he had once lived, staring at the mansions that were no longer his. He was a man without a place in the world, a relic of a bygone era. The few times he was recognized, people would stare, whisper, point. He was a curiosity, a living reminder of a scandal that had captivated the nation. He hated the attention, the constant reminder of his fall. He longed for anonymity, for the simple peace of being invisible. But that peace eluded him. He was Artemio López Tardón, one of the Miamis, and that identity would define him for the rest of his life. In the United States, Álvaro continued to languish in his maximum security prison. His appeals had all been exhausted. His 150-year sentence was final. He had become a ghost within the system, a man whose name was known only to the guards and a handful of other inmates. He spent his days in a routine of desperate monotony, exercise in the tiny prison yard, meals in the cavernous cafeteria, hours in his cell reading and writing. He wrote long letters to his family in Spain, letters filled with regret and longing, letters that were his only connection to the world outside. He wrote about his childhood, his dreams, his mistakes. He wrote about the son he would never see grow up, the life he would never live. The letters were a form of therapy, a way of processing the enormity of his loss. But they were also a reminder of everything he had thrown away. He often thought about Sharon, his ex-wife, the woman who had betrayed him. He felt a complex mixture of rage and regret. He blamed her for his capture, but he also knew, in his quieter moments, that he had brought it upon himself. His violence, his paranoia, his inability to control his temper, they had all driven her away, driven her into the arms of the FBI. He was the architect of his own destruction, and the knowledge was a poison that ate at him daily. The prison was a world unto itself, a violent, chaotic society with its own rules and hierarchies. Álvaro, with his wealth and his notoriety, was a target. He had to be constantly vigilant, constantly aware of the threats that lurked in every corner. He had been attacked twice, once in the yard, once in the cafeteria. He had survived both assaults, but the scars, physical and psychological, remained. He had learned to keep to himself, to avoid the gangs and the cliques, to project an aura of quiet danger that discouraged further attacks. He was a lone wolf in a world of packs, and his isolation was both a protection and a punishment. The days blurred into weeks, the weeks into months, the months into years. Time had lost its meaning. There was only the endless grinding repetition of prison life, a life without hope, without future, without end. The story of the Miamis, however, was not confined to the fates of its three main protagonists. It rippled outwards, touching the lives of countless others who had been caught up in their orbit. The families of their victims continued to grieve, their losses forever unavenged. The communities they had terrorized continued to struggle with the legacy of addiction and violence they had left behind. The police officers and prosecutors who had brought them to justice continued their work, moving on to new cases, new challenges, but always carrying with them the lessons learned from the Miamis. The case had been a defining moment in their careers, a reminder of why they did what they did, a validation of the long, often thankless struggle against organized crime. The final chapter of the Miami's story is not a tidy conclusion, but a series of lingering echoes, a testament to the enduring impact of their rise and fall. The characters who populated this drama, from the kingpins to the foot soldiers, have scattered to the winds, their fates as varied as the roles they played. Some are dead, killed in the ongoing violence that their empire spawned. Some are in prison, serving out long sentences in cells far removed from the luxury they once knew. Some have disappeared, vanished into the shadows of witness protection or self-imposed exile, their identities erased, their pasts a secret they will carry to their graves. And a few, a very few, have managed to rebuild their lives, carving out new existences from the wreckage of the old. Artemio López Tardón, the man who had once commanded the logistical heart of a transatlantic cocaine empire, became a ghost in the city he once ruled. He walked the streets of Madrid, an invisible man, his presence known only to a few. He lived in a small apartment in a nondescript neighborhood, his days a monotonous routine of walks, reading, and solitary meals. He had no friends, no social life, no purpose. The €85 million fine had left him destitute, and the stigma of his conviction made it impossible for him to find work. He survived on the charity of his family, a humbling dependence for a man who had once moved millions with a phone call. The stoicism that had defined him during the trial had hardened into a kind of resignation, the acceptance of his diminished circumstances. He rarely spoke of the past, and when he did, it was with a detached air, as if he were recounting the life of someone else. The fire that had driven him, the ambition that had propelled him to the heights of the criminal world, had been extinguished. He was a hollow shell, a man going through the motions of existence, waiting for an end that would not come soon enough. In the women's prison in central Spain, Ana Maria Cameno continued to serve her 16-year sentence. She had become a fixture in the institution, a respected, if still somewhat feared, figure among the inmates. She had risen through the prison's informal hierarchy, her intelligence and her calm authority earning her a position of influence. She acted as a mediator in disputes, a source of advice for younger inmates struggling to navigate the brutal realities of prison life. She had even taken up teaching, offering basic literacy classes to women who had never learned to read or write. It was a small act of redemption, a way of giving back to a community that had, in its own way, accepted her. She received regular visits from her children, now teenagers, who had grown up with a mother in prison. The visits were bittersweet, moments of joy mixed with the pain of separation. She watched them grow through a pane of glass, their lives unfolding in a world she could only observe from a distance. She clung to the hope of eventual release, of a future where she could be a mother to them in person, not just through letters and monitored phone calls. The 16-year sentence was a mountain, but she was determined to climb it, one day at a time, and she had found a kind of peace in the climb. In the United States, Álvaro López Tardón remained in his maximum security prison, a man serving a life sentence in all but name. The 150 years stretched before him, an infinity of concrete and steel. He had long since stopped counting the days, stopped hoping for appeals or reductions. He existed in a state of suspended animation, his body alive but his spirit crushed. He received occasional letters from his family, but the distance, both physical and emotional, was too great to bridge. He was alone, utterly and completely alone, with the consequences of his choices. The man who had once lived in a South Beach mansion, who had driven a Bugatti and collected art, was now a number, a name on a prison roster, a ghost in the American penal system. He spent his days in his cell, reading, writing, and staring at the walls. He had long since stopped thinking about the past. The memories were too painful, a reminder of everything he had lost. He focused on the present, on the tiny details of prison life, on the small routines that gave structure to his endless days. He had become a creature of the system, adapted to its rhythms, its rules, its cruelties. The fire that had driven him, the ambition that had propelled him, had long since been extinguished. There was only the gray, monotonous present, stretching into an infinite future. The legacy of the Miamis, however, extended far beyond the fates of its three main protagonists. The methods they had pioneered, the structures they had built, the connections they had forged, all of it lived on in the evolving landscape of European organized crime. The use of front men and shell corporations to launder money, once their signature, became standard practice. The establishment of clandestine labs within Europe, a tactic perfected by Ana Maria Cameno, was widely copied. The cultivation of corrupt contacts within ports and airports, a key element of Artemio's logistical network, became a routine part of any large-scale trafficking operation. The Miamis, in their fall, had inadvertently created a template for the future of the drug trade. The power vacuum they left behind was filled by a new generation of traffickers, more cautious, more sophisticated, more attuned to the lessons of their predecessors' mistakes. These new organizations were less visible, less prone to the flashy excesses that had doomed the Miamis. They operated from the shadows, their leaders anonymous, their structures fluid, their methods constantly evolving. They learned from the Miami's successes and, more importantly, from their failures. They understood that the key to survival was not power, but invisibility, not wealth, but security, not fame, but anonymity. The days of the celebrity drug lord, the kingpin who courted the media and flaunted his riches, were over. The new model was the ghost, the man who existed only in whispers, whose name was known only to a trusted few, whose wealth was hidden so deeply that it might as well not exist. The violence that had always accompanied the drug trade did not diminish. If anything, it became more pervasive, more random, more difficult to trace. The structured, hierarchical violence of the Miamis, the violence of orders given and carried out, was replaced by a chaotic, fragmented violence. The violence of competing factions, of shifting alliances, of betrayal and revenge. The murders continued, in Madrid and its surrounding suburbs, in the ports and the prisons, in the quiet streets where former associates lived in fear. The bodies piled up, each one a message, a warning, a reminder that in this world, there was no escape. The police did their best to keep up, but the sheer volume of the violence, the complexity of the rivalries, made it impossible to prevent. The legacy of the Miamis was not just a template for trafficking, it was a template for a permanent state of war. The case also left a deep mark on Spanish society and its institutions. The trial had been a national spectacle, a prolonged exposure to the dark underbelly of the country's economic miracle. It forced a reckoning with uncomfortable truths, the corruption that enabled such organizations to flourish, the poverty and lack of opportunity that produced their foot soldiers, the insatiable demand for drugs that fueled their profits. The conversation was painful, but it was necessary. It led to reforms in law enforcement, to increased international cooperation, to a greater public awareness of the realities of organized crime. The Miamis, in their downfall, had inadvertently contributed to the fight against the very world they had inhabited. For the families of the victims, however, the legacy was personal and permanent. The mother of Francisco Javier Manzanares, the bouncer murdered in 2001, still visited his grave every week, still mourned the son she had lost to a bullet in a Móstoles street. The widow of Ricardo Rojas, Richie, still struggled to explain to her grandson why his father had been killed in front of him. The children of the men who had died in the ongoing violence, who had grown up without fathers, carried the scars of that loss for the rest of their lives. The story of the Miamis was not just a story of crime and punishment, it was a story of grief, of loss, of lives cut short and futures stolen. The journalists who had covered the case, who had spent years immersed in the world of the Miamis, moved on to other stories, but they carried the lessons with them. They had learned to see beneath the surface, to understand the complex web of relationships that underpinned the criminal world. They had learned that the glamour was a facade, that the real story was always darker, more complicated, more human. They had learned that the line between the criminal and the legitimate was often blurred, that the same forces of ambition, greed, and fear that drove the traffickers also drove the world of business and politics. The Miamis were not an anomaly. They were a symptom, a reflection of a society that had lost its way. The police officers and prosecutors who had built the case, who had spent years juizong the money and the drugs, also moved on. They took the lessons of Operation Aelia with them to new investigations, new challenges. They had learned the importance of patience, of meticulous attention to detail, of international cooperation. They had learned that the fight against organized crime was a marathon, not a sprint, that the victories were hard-won and often temporary. They had learned that for every organization they dismantled, two more would rise to take its place. But they had also learned that the fight was worth it, that every conviction, every sentence was a small step towards a safer, more just society. And so the story of the Miamis fades into history, a chapter in the long, bloody annals of organized crime. The names of Álvaro and Artemio López Tardón, of Ana María Cameno, of Juan Carlos Peña, of Ricardo Rojas, will be remembered by a few, studied by criminologists and law enforcement officials, whispered in the dark corners of the underworld. But for most people, they will become a footnote, a cautionary tale, a reminder of a time when a group of men and women from the barrios of Madrid built an empire on cocaine and blood, and then watched it all come crashing down. The final image is not one of triumph or tragedy, but of quiet, enduring consequence. Álvaro in his cell, staring at a wall. Artemio on a Madrid street, an invisible man. Ana María in a prison classroom, teaching a woman to read. The victims in their graves, the families in their grief, the communities in their struggle. The Miamis are gone, but their legacy lives on, in the methods of the traffickers, in the violence of the streets, in the memories of those they touched. They rose like a rocket, and they fell like a stone, and the ripples of their fall will continue to spread for years to come. This has been the story of the Miamis, a story of ambition and greed, of violence and betrayal, of power and its ultimate, inevitable price. A story that began on the streets of Madrid and ended in the prisons of two nations. A story that serves as a stark reminder that in the world of organized crime there are no winners, only survivors. And even survival, as Artemio López Tardón can attest, is a kind of prison in itself. Thank you for listening to the end.